Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time joining me, make sure to click that subscribe button and like this video if you find this interview helpful. Today, I'm going to be interviewing a very special person. I'm interviewing Sally Norton. Sally is a renowned nutritionist and an expert in the role of toxic superfoods such as oxalates. Over the past few years, I have really come to appreciate the role of oxalates in many chronic health conditions, such as interstitial cystitis and painful bladder syndrome. I personally have relied on a lot of the content that Sally Norton provides to the health community. I am really honored to have her on for this interview today, so stay tuned. You don't want to miss this interview. Hi, everybody. I am here today with a very special guest. I'm here with Sally Norton. And for those of you who are new to oxalates, Sally is one of the top experts in the field, and she's here to talk to us about these toxic little crystals that are commonly found in our food. But before we do, I want to give you a short introduction on who she is and her background. So Sally K. Norton realized at the young age of 12 that she wanted to help people improve their health by eating a better diet. She earned a bachelor's degree in nutritional science from Cornell University and a master's in public health from the University of North Carolina. I'm in North Carolina.
Oh, yeah, cool. All right.
Yep, I'm the Charlotte area. And
Cool.
she ate a vegetarian and vegan diet for years because that's all we hear. That's how we should be eating for our health. And in her case, and a lot of you listening, her health continued to deteriorate, including myself. And she was finally able to continue in her public health research career. So what she learned was that standard and alternative medicine proved no match for her wide range of health issues. And those included severe joint pain. So those of you listening probably have some of these, digestive problems, autoimmune issues, and sleep and neurological problems. And she got really serious about the low oxalate eating after reading that it might help her joint pain. And interestingly enough, everything else got better. So that led her into studying oxalates and to understand how such a thing can actually happen. And she started talking to people about their own health issues and discovered how devastating and poisonous, and I'm going to use that word a lot, poisonous oxalates are. So now she's helped up hundreds of people in her consulting practice to improve their health by doing this low oxalate diet. And she actually has a book coming out. I think it says December 2022. Is that correct?
Right.
And that is going to help with other people to learn about their remarkable history and science of oxalates, so understand what it is and how it wrecks your health and what you can do by adopting a lower oxalate diet. So today, she's going to share with us what she learned about oxalates and how lowering it can help you improve your health. Hi, Sally.
Hello.
So nice
to be
to
talking
have
to an IC person. It's so fun.
Yeah. So those of you who are new to my channel, I was diagnosed probably now it's looking like 12 years because my daughter's 14, she was 2. And, looking back, Sally, I knew I had a bladder problem, but it was just one of those like really underlying, urinary frequency, you say, oh, maybe I'm drinking a lot of water, maybe it's caffeine, that typical stuff, but I didn't have pain, but I had other issues. I had hormonal imbalances. In college, I was always bloated, digestive issues. My period was never regular. In fact, I had to get pregnant to regulate my cycle. And they put me on birth control pills, which I'm sure didn't help. But it wasn't until after my C-section, which I think hormonally, something had changed with me. And then boom, I woke up one day and I was peeing fire. That's all I have to say. It felt like I was peeing glass. Now that we know what oxalates are, I know exactly what was happening. Doctors didn't know what to do. They wanted to put me on the medications. And there I was going around that rabbit hole of the IC diagnosis and treatment. But I never did all the conventional stuff because it just didn't sit right with me. I'm like, something's not right with me here. This can't be normal. At 31, this can't be a death sentence, but that's how it felt. So then I learned about oxalates, and then I learned about you. I learned about the Trying Low Oxalate group. And honestly, the only thing that really helped me go into remission was fixing my gut and reducing my oxalates out of my diet. So people listening here are like, Oxa, what? What is this? So Let's first talk about what oxalates are, and then I want you to kind of lead that into your story.
Yeah, so and let's come back around to the fact that your symptoms exploded after a difficult birthing experience and surgery, which is a really common thing where you can have something simmering around in the background. And so I just want people to recognize, even though you don't know the word oxalate, and you're not aware of oxalate poisoning and oxalate toxicity, because it just really isn't being taken seriously in any form of healthcare yet. But that's changing because more and more of us have this problem and there's no other solution to it. And the problem is that we're consuming every day in most meals and snacks more of this oxalic acid, and the oxalic acid that also forms these crystals. So we call it oxalates because it's actually several different chemical forms of oxalic acid. So we call them oxalates plural, but we're eating this acid that also has crystals with it. It's like little bits of glass. And the two of them together in their various forms they can take are really a problem. And we're designed to handle it because it's a compound that easily forms in nature. It forms in our own livers. Our livers produce some, maybe even our kidney cells, maybe our red blood cells. So that even that small, really tiny amount that the body's producing is tricky to study. So they keep saying maybe in the literature, but it looks like there's little bits of it produced by cells, the mitochondria and so on, even in our own bodies. But nature produces it, the mist by the sea, the pollution in the air, it's in polluted acid rain. If you ever heard of acid rain, oxalic acid is one of the acids in the rain.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, most people don't know about that.
Wow.
And it's part of what makes polluted air really bad for your lungs, because breathing it all the time is not so good. The acid is the part of the oxalates that easily gets into your blood. It's a tiny compound. It's just 2 carbons, but 4 oxygens, very oxidative, very stressful compound that forms these. It's an ion, which means it has a charge on it. It has 1 or 2 negative charges, depending on whether it's dropped that second proton. So it's just a little acid dropper. And those charges attract to the positive charges on minerals. Loves calcium, magnesium, iron, and all the other minerals. And overeating it causes many problems, including nutrient deficiencies, primarily with your minerals. You're going to have a nutrient mineral deficient diet, especially deficient in calcium and iron if you eat a lot of oxalate. And this is particularly dangerous for young children. We knew by 1935 that if you fed spinach, which is a very high oxalate food that's popular, you will cause calcium and iron deficiency in your child. If they're being fed spinach and other high oxalate foods, which include things like rhubarb, almonds, cashews, peanuts, potatoes and potato chips and French fries.
Potato chips.
Yeah. And we all grow up on like peanut butter. And now in my generation, like peanut butter and whole wheat bread, the bran is high in oxalate. So the more whole grain your breads and grains are, the more oxalate. The new pseudo grains that are so popular, quinoa, teff, buckwheat, these are really
gluten-free. Yeah.
Gluten-free. Go gluten-free, and you're either doing almond flour or buckwheat or one of these things. And yeah, I started like the soba noodles and stuff like that. Like buckwheat, you just pick one of these foods that are so popular. So beet greens, beets, Swiss chard, and spinach. Those are the greens. And then sorrel, which most Americans don't eat much of, sorrel, but you'll get it in a fancy restaurant as a little dab on the side. So there's like popular leafy greens that are like the dark ones are the ones that are trouble. All the other greens are not high in oxalate. So it's not like you stop all vegetables or never eat a salad again.
Right.
And it's not a strict problem where you have to have 0. Like with gluten allergy, any amount will trigger immune reactivity.
I'm glad you just said that, because I always have to have this conversation with, I read somewhere it was about a teaspoon is the maximum that body can handle before an immune response is actually mounted.
A teaspoon of what?
Gluten.
Yeah, well, it doesn't take much in some people's systems. By the time we've overabused it with the various toxins and malnutrition program we kind of run as normal diet these days, some people are just really prone to that immune activation. Women are especially vulnerable because we have very strong immune systems, probably part of just the whole reproductive process that we need a strong immune system to be able to protect an infant and so on. So women are more prone to arthritis and rheumatic problems and immune system. You hear a lot more about these autoimmune diseases with younger and younger women more than you do in men and boys, because we have strong immune systems as part of our strength. But it does mean that we can't keep irritating our immune system with things like little crystals.
Yeah.
And a toxin that irritates and damages cell membranes, damages mitochondria in the cells. Yeah.
Wow. So, so your health was deteriorated with this little crystal. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I grew up loving vegetables and gardening and Swiss chard and beet greens and rhubarb. So by the time I was 12, I was probably poisoned in other ways that weren't food related as well. But I was already starting to have back pain, little arthritic like things that my grandmother would say, oh, that's just growing pains. I started having trouble concentrating in high school and reading. I had decided in 7th grade that I was going to go to a good school for nutrition. And by 10th grade, I knew it would be Cornell. So, I wanted to do well in school, and I, got through it all and got to Cornell, but it wasn't easy because my poor brain wasn't working so well. And I had really frank inflammatory rheumatoid style arthritis by the time I was 18. I remember at 19 years old, I was coming home from a stressful thing and it was late. And I was trying to get in the back door of my parents' house with my key. And I didn't have the strength in my hands to turn the key in the knob.
Wow.
That's how swollen up my fingers were. And when you get all that swelling, you also lose your strength. So I realized in retrospect, and then I started having foot problems my freshman year in college. I was hoofing it around, carrying my anatomy textbooks and all my stuff. And my foot started hurting. And it took me a while. And a friend in my nutrition class said, well, you should go see an orthopedic guy. So this landed me on this long saga that eventually landed me leaving college for a 4-year medical leave of absence to have bilateral foot surgery that really didn't get better. And so during those years, if I needed to go to the grocery store or something that required a fair amount of walking like that, I would need a wheelchair. I carried Canadian crutches with me for years and was put on high dose ibuprofen, 3,600 milligrams a day for 5 years.
Oh my gosh.
It's amazing. I didn't end up with IC and kidney damage, but I remained able to keep eating my Swiss chard. I continued when I went back to Cornell. I planted Swiss chard in my now married student housing little apartment. We had a little space out front. I had flowers and Swiss chard. I was eating Swiss chard. And that, I didn't get better. I didn't get better. I had
that ibuprofen wrecked your gut too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the thing that really took out my gut was later, actually, after I got off the drug and I was doing my vegan diet by then. So I had been vegetarian for 8 years. And then John Robbins came out with Diet for a New America and convinced those of us who had been taught by Francis Moore Lepay to be vegetarian to go vegan, because of course, all milk is pus and eggs are evil. And I don't know why we should do these things, but I believed him. And it was during those vegan years, and I'm working in public health. I'm working for a city health department as a single woman, and I'm putting my mixed beans with a scoop of peanut butter and a clove of garlic in the crock pot at night, and then waking up and having that slow cooked beans for breakfast because it's a convenient, cheap, low workload kind of vegan breakfast. Well, anybody with a nutrition degree would know to never do such a stupid thing as that. But I didn't know. I just went to Cornell. I don't know who will teach the fact that the anti-nutrient called lectins, these are massive proteins, not like little oxalate, which is way worse. Massive proteins that you must disable with 3 days of soaking and a high heat pressure cooking kind of heat.
Yeah.
I was not soaking them and I was not using high heat. So it was after a summer of doing that I had a quote post-infectious IBS onset. And it was the Friday before Labor Day in 1990, a day that will live in permanent Sally history, because ever since my gut has been wrong ever since. I permanently finished off whatever ibuprofen started.
Yeah.
The lectins were worse than the ibuprofen. If you read the literature on ibuprofen and NSAIDs, it only takes one dose and 12 hours later, you've injured your gut. Seriously, you can have bleeding and just with one dose. And I put up with tons of that. I had a very tough body, but I wore it down with my veganism and my ignorance about oxalates. And it's embarrassing that someone would have an Ivy League degree in nutrition and a degree in public health and be in holistic health and healing field and not know any of this. I was an ignoramus.
Yeah,
like, I don't like to be ignorant.
No, I had a PT also put me on ibuprofen as well for a year. I did it for a year. She said 4 times a day. And, I mean, we don't know. I mean, because things are over the counter. And I think sometimes when things are available over the counter, we're like, oh, it might be safe. But then, a lot of that is, I think, confirmational bias. we convince ourselves that it's safe. Well, that actually is a good segue into the next question, because I want to talk about why the food industry tells us then we should eat oxalates. And since you said, nutrition degree and you didn't know about it, how come other people with nutrition degrees or even doctors don't know about it? What's the problem here?
That was one of my big questions. So I spent a lot of time, I've spent years digging up the science on oxalate, and the science surprisingly goes back to the 1700s. And we already knew by 1842 that if you overeat oxalates, you create an illness called the oxalic acid diathesis, which was a diagnosis starting around 1842.
Really?
Stopped being used around the 1940s. And at that time, medicine was switching to a whole test-based science, a sciencey medicine. So they could really bump out the competition. So there was a race for a monopoly that made medicine go high tech. So there's a high bar to get into medicine, and that you have to kind of regulate this high science with fancy stuff, MRIs, and it gets fancier as time goes by, so that, they can corner a market and kind of bump off the chiropractors and the others and keep them at a different level of income and social status and so on. So medicine got very test-based, and with a lot of diseases, there's no symptoms and you need some kind of test. And if some diseases don't show up on the test, well, then we'll just cross it off the list and we're not going to deal with it. So basically, oxalate poisoning got crossed off the list because there's no good way to test for it with blood tests. Even urine tests are not a reliable way to test for it. Even a biopsy, which is the gold standard, has the same problem, which is easy false negatives, which means tissue sampling or time sampling, you'll get periods or places where there just isn't detectable oxalate. And then there's a high tech need to do these things correctly. If you were to take a chip of bone out of someone's hip, which you only do in really desperate situations where you suspect, this is a deadly or genetic form of the disease. So there isn't a convenient, no, we'll just take a little blood test and decide what you've got wrong with you. So it got crossed off the list.
So the blood test by Arup Labs, which I've never run because I think you have to do it in a hospital, that won't be able to show, because I know the urine testing is not very good, even with the organic acid. Sometimes it'll be negative, and I always have to explain to people, it doesn't mean you don't have an oxalate problem. Please don't run with this, please. Sometimes I'm even hesitant to do that because it comes out negative, and I'm like, please, 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 please don't take it for what it is.
Mine was negative in 2009. My functional medicine doctor and the whole, OAT test said, oh, no, 0 oxalate problem whatsoever. I was poisoning myself with oxalate, and it shows up negative. And that's because the body is preserving the kidney function best it can. And I think accommodating a whole metabolism of what I call sequestration, where the body has to hold on to it. So the body will pick it up out of the blood because it can't leave oxalic acid running around in the blood, because oxalic acid likes to date heavily with calcium. When you lower the calcium level in the blood, because it's going into this bond, now it's no longer an ion. You need these ions. That's what electrolytes are. Mineral electrolytes, mineral ions. They have to have the charge on them, and that helps things like the pacemaker of the heart work.
Right.
If you take out too much calcium too fast, you go into arrhythmias and can get into some serious heart problems, create stroke, you can try a heart attack. And most people who are abruptly, acutely poisoned with oxalate end up dying of a heart attack, not of the kidney failure, which is happening at the same time.
Wow. Okay. So there's no real, okay. So those listening, how can I test for it? There really isn't a very good test, so we're saying even the blood test that they do in a hospital is not definitely going to identify the problem.
No, even in people who have a known disease, or, they're in renal failure and they prove that it's oxalate causing the renal failure with a biopsy of the kidney. They'll find the kidneys are full of nephrocalcinosis, which is a diffuse calcium oxalate buildup in the kidneys, or they'll find serious kidney stones all over the kidney or in the urinary tract, and they'll find a blood level of oxalate that's undetectable.
Got it. Okay, that's good to know. So really it's a lot of it is symptom based. I'm actually starting to realize that, and you probably agree with this, that the high level of oxalate in the diet is bad for everyone. I mean, I hate using blanket statements because as nutritionists, we have to be personalized nutrition, but I'm starting to see that, due to the nature of what oxalates do to the body and hijacking the mitochondria and your detoxification mechanisms, having a lot of oxalates in your diet isn't good, even if you don't have a current condition.
That is absolutely true. And if you have any kind of condition or heading in or out of surgery, having high oxalate will never help you. It'll just make everything harder for your body. There's no question. I mean, you could say that about mercury. We should avoid swordfish for everyone, especially pregnant women and children, because swordfish is so high in mercury. Well, the same has been true for oxalates, but we've from the beginning, even back in the 1930s, when we knew that feeding spinach to infants was so dangerous, the medical folks were saying, well, but it probably has vitamin A and other good stuff, so we won't call it out. So right from the beginning, they just, some couple of guys who wrote a paper said, well, we won't bother with that one and we'll just set it aside. And these things keep getting passed down in textbooks and get passed down in the culture of nutrition and healthcare. And there was never really a field of nutritional toxicology paying attention to the toxins in plant foods and really thinking seriously about the effects. And if there's plenty of literature that keeps pointing to oxalic acid and oxalate crystals, big problem in the body. So, the first problem is that you're eating crystals that are designed to injure the mucosal tract and will turn on inflammation. So you're going to up inflammation in the digestive tract by eating these little pieces of glass. And then the acid that passes between the cells of the digestive tract, that's how it gets into your body. It doesn't have to go through the cells. There's this little gap between all the cells that are connected with like this Velcro proteins that hook, just like Velcro between the cells. Those tight junctions allow water and anything dissolved in the water to get in the body. And oxalate's very small, like a water molecule, and gets in there. Now, if those tight junctions are loose because you have any kinds of inflammation or stress going on, or you had bariatric surgery, the amount that you would absorb goes up by 4 or 5 times the normal. So you don't even have to eat a high oxalate diet. If you have an inflamed gut, you got to be really careful about oxalates. If you've had bariatric surgery, then in my opinion, you shouldn't have surgery unless you'll never eat spinach and almonds and buckwheat again. Like, well, Who cares about spinach, almonds, and buckwheat? Like, okay, fine.
And that's the food that they're being recommended to eat on the weight loss diet.
Yeah, they are still allowing bariatric patients to eat spinach, even though the science is very clear that that will lead to arthritis, joint destruction, and ultimately kidney failure. And you're going to end up on dialysis. And a huge number of bariatric patients end up falling apart with not just the malnutrition that it causes, but this toxicity that causes this inflammatory problems with arthritis and joint loss. You can look up some famous people who've had bariatric surgery. You'll see they've had many other joint surgeries and they've got problems, health problems.
Interesting. Okay, so let's move on to the next question, because I think this one a lot of people are confused about. What about like the genetics of this and the endogenous oxalate production? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is something we should not spend too much time on. The genetics of this is there's various levels of propensities to various outcomes. If you've overate oxalate, too much Pringles and peanut butter sandwiches, or too many Reese's peanut butter cups, because chocolate's also one of those high oxalate foods.
My gosh.
Or too many spinach smoothies with chia seeds. Chia seeds are terrible. That's going to eventually hurt you somewhere, and where it hurts you is probably a combination of the way you live and your genetics. So there's a strong, like only 15 or 20% of people will get kidney stones from this high oxalate eating. Mm-hmm. And that's genetic. But the rest of us who don't get kidney stones will get fibromyalgia or headaches or arthritis or interstitial cystitis or bladder stones. I have one guy, he's had hundreds of thousands of bladder stones and no kidney stones at all.
How do they detect that? Is that with an ultrasound?
They go up there with a scope until there's so many stones in the way, you can't see them anymore because you can't actually get the instrument in. And this man was to the point where they couldn't insert an instrument in his urethra because he had so much bladder stones. They told him he had over 100,000 bladder stones. And then he worked with me for 2 years, and then they were able to finally scope him this January, and they found maybe
Wow.
4 or just a few in the wall of the bladder. All the rest of it all cleared out with a low oxalate diet and some lemon juice. And yeah.
Was he eating a high oxalate diet prior?
Yes, for a long time. And he's in his 70s. So it got really bad where he's in diapers all the time. He has no more urinary tract control. He's just leaking on himself all the time because this went on so long. And he was in a community where everybody was afraid of illness and they were all promoting things like smoothies, because the smoothie thing was really big in the 70s for cancer. And then in the 80s for AIDS, and is these various waves of issues, because there was a big war on cancer that got launched in the 70s. And cancer, which used to be really rare, was getting more common in the 70s. And that's when carrot juicing and so on got real popular. And then
the Gerson therapy, I think, was all juicing for cancer.
Gerson, well, the original Gerson therapy, Max Gerson was into raw liver. And the main thing that fixed his wife was raw liver. But then Charlotte picked up on the juicing thing and made a whole deal out of the juicing thing and kind of dropped the raw liver because they could no longer find guaranteed healthy animals where they wouldn't have some kind of parasite or something. So so things get warped with time.
So as far as the conditions associated with oxalates, we talk about IC, we talk about fibromyalgia, joint pain. What are some of the other common conditions with associated with oxalates? I know we talked about a little bit about the thyroid, but you can go into that a little bit.
Yeah, thyroid is a really big one. I mean, thyroid problems seem to be exploding, and Hashimoto's is suddenly everywhere. Something like 85% of all of us by the time we're 50 years old will have oxalate crystals accumulating in their thyroid gland. And so here's the thing. The acid comes in, it steals the calcium out of your blood. The bones have to sacrifice to replace that calcium. So the bones are getting thinner. If you have osteopenia or osteoporosis, chances are oxalates is a major player in that. So there's another really common thing that's getting more common is bone diseases, arthritis, any kind of autoimmune condition, irritable bladder, teeth sensitivity, eye issues, the bones, the eyes, the thyroid gland. These are probably the most common places of oxalate accumulation. And then the kidneys. And the kidneys, most of us end up with nephrocalcinosis, which is this diffuse. And that's an example of how the body pulls the oxalate out of the stream of where the metabolic activity is, either the bloodstream, and in the kidneys, it's out of the tubules where the urine is forming. The body deliberately pulls it out of there so that the crystals won't form in the tubules and block the flow of the forming urine. So you keep doing this sequestration without a break, without ever the low oxalate diet intervening. And eventually you've got calcified kidneys. Most people die with calcified kidneys, and with a calcified adrenal glands, you can have calcified saliva glands because the saliva is concentrating oxalate at a rate of like 10 to 40 times the level in the blood. So whenever it's elevated in the blood, you're going to see more tartar on the teeth, unless you've got clogging saliva glands. And one of my clients, her saliva gland kind of sunk. So the connective tissues also get weak. So anything with a weak connective tissue, chronic pain, my foot pain was because my connective tissue in my feet was never quite sturdy enough. I always had to have side support. So I wore Sebago moccasins all the time. 100% of the time I could not go barefoot because I needed that side support. Otherwise my feet couldn't hold themselves together and that would cause pain. So the way I avoided pain for 30 years was to never go barefoot, never wear heels. And after I went on the diet, now I can go barefoot, I can run barefoot, and I can wear heels. And I'm now 58 and I'm finally able to do stuff like I could probably go play ultimate frisbee, something I would have loved to do. I would have loved to have been able to play racquetball. None of those things were on the plate for me because I had this weak connective tissue. So if you have thin skin, you don't heal well, if you get a little something that lasts a long time, your cells are in trouble, and they're in trouble because they can't make enough energy because oxalate is interfering with energy production of cells. So you end up with fibrotic scar tissue like things. If you have old injuries that haven't healed, old scars that don't go away, if you're developing fibrotic things, fibrosis of any part, this is probably oxalate creating these things. A lot of this stuff that we think of as old age, dementia is another one.
Yeah.
Anything that you associate with old age is all of those things are oxalates, because oxalates are aging the cells, causing oxidative stress, damaging the cell's ability to produce energy, and slowing us down in terms of cellular maintenance, tissue maintenance.
Yeah. And hijacking our detoxification mechanisms as
And
well.
it does that because every meal goes into hepatic circulation. So everything you absorb from a meal goes into this short little circulatory system, complicated circulatory system that takes it straight to the liver. So 100% of all the oxalic acid that gets into your bloodstream floods the liver cells. And the liver cells are really good at protecting themselves with their own glutathione. But you end up using up so much glutathione after every spinach smoothie and every peanut butter, whatever, and chocolate this, that there's not a lot of power left to detox everything else. And so you end up with chemical sensitivities and other things that show funky detox problems. Like for me, I had elevated phase 1 because my liver was in stress mode all the time, and sluggish phase 2, which are these conjugation pathways, and those conjugates get worn out. You don't have enough glutathione anymore, so you end up toxic in many ways. So if you eat a high oxalate diet, the chances of other toxins getting to you, whether it's the GMOs or the glyphosate that's on everything, or whether it's the shoe polish or the nail polish, those things are going to start bothering you. Your bounce sheets, all this toxic stuff we should avoid anyway. This is, all toxins are worthy of avoiding. You don't need them for hermetic benefits. You get that from exercise and from other things. You don't need to be making yourself toxic at any state. And you cannot justify a food based on, oh, it has this other good thing in it, so therefore ignore the toxins. Well, swordfish has omega-3s in it, but that's not a good reason to eat a lot of swordfish. You're going to end up with mercury poisoning, as Tony Robbins ended up really damaging himself with mercury poisoning by ignoring the swordfish problem. He loved swordfish.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, you can ignore these things, but there's a price to be paid, and that's fine. Everyone has to live their own life. Unfortunately, for those of us who really want our health to be forefront and have health and independence and consider our health more valuable than our relationships, because it is you can always make a new friend, but you can't ever get a new body all over.
No, and it affects everything in your life.
Everything, your mood, your ability to make money, your ability to enjoy, your ability to lift a grandchild depends on your joints and muscles cooperating, and you being able to lift that child and not suddenly go into a back spasm and drop the kid on the concrete. You need to have it together to have a good life. So, but not everyone has that value. And I respect that, because everyone's living their life in their way. But I think it's a wounded place to live from if you're willing to ignore your health and let it go into the ground.
Oh, I truly agree with that statement. Your health is everything. Before I go to the next question, I want to talk about the salivary gland thing that you just brought up. Can you expand on that a little bit more about what that condition is and what are some of those symptoms?
Yeah. So just like I had a hard lumpy thyroid gland that I didn't know. But luckily I had a primary care doctor who knew how to do a basic exam, and we got to send you for a scan. We'll go do a ultrasound and see what's lumpy in your thyroid gland. That was obviously my oxalate problem. That all went away later, but the same thing can happen. You can feel sometimes the hardness, or there's definitely sort of a swelling in there. I think it's usually asymptomatic, but you can tell if I had dry mouth forever. And that's probably because I was having trouble producing enough saliva because I had so much oxalate in my saliva glands. I didn't have any saliva gland symptoms at all, but I had adrenal burnout. So I would have to saturate a cotton roll with saliva for a test to test my adrenal hormones. And it would take me an hour or more to get enough saliva to do that test. And, you're used to dry mouth. You don't even notice you have a problem. I never thought it was a problem. I just thought, how do people do this stupid saliva collection? And now I produce a lot of saliva now, but obviously my adrenal gland or my saliva glands were having trouble. But, oxalate can really damage mitochondria and cell function to the point where it creates cancer and other problems in the cells. And it creates this connective tissue problem. So in one case, one woman, her saliva glands had fallen all the way down to the bottom of her neck. And so they thought it was more of a lymph, tumor.
Yeah, that's what I think. The reason I brought that up, because I hear people say that a lot, and I thought it was maybe their immune system. But now that you're talking to me, I'm thinking, you know what? Maybe this is what it was. Because you always hear about the swelling lymph nodes, and that could be like your immune system telling you that there's some inflammation, or sometimes, those chronic infections. But now, based on what you're saying, I'm thinking, you know what? I'm going to start to relook at that as possibly being the oxalates swelling up the salivary glands.
Yeah. And all over the body, if you start getting crystals forming. Now, see, there's two things I'd love to explain. One is why medicine is missing the fact that crystals are forming in the body, even though it shows up in all these studies that show, wow, when we looked at all these thyroid glands, they all had oxalates in them, and the other thing is, I'm forgetting what the other thing is, but what we talk about is crystals being an inciting stimulus. You hear this all the time in the medical. If you read, you won't hear it. You read it when you're a nut like me and spend your whole life in the library.
Yeah.
The inciting stimulus of the immune system. What turns on the immune system? What creates autoimmune diseases? It's an inciting stimulus, something that tells the immune system, hey, there's a problem here, there's a problem here. And it keeps turning on the immune system on, and turns on the dark side of the immune system that stays in this pro-inflammatory state. And you start that right away in the bloodstream after a smoothie. Within 40 minutes, you've damaged the immune cells, and they're already throwing out pro-inflammatory chemicals all over the body. Within one spinach smoothie, because of the oxalic acid getting into your bloodstream, creates traveling immune cells in your bloodstream that are both damaged and in an inflamed state. And then that's just the acid. Later on, you've got crystals forming in places like where you had your surgery for the birth of the child. There's scar tissue. There's these bits of cells. There's vacuoles that escape from cells. There's dead and dying cell membranes from the cell membrane itself, and the organelles like the mitochondria hanging around. And those little bits of vacuoles and other little, biochemical, structures are the nucleating substance. So that causes the acid to nucleate into a crystal. So wherever you've got injury, inflammation,
your own cell debris. That's interesting, because I wonder if even when people who have like the fibrosis, or they have like, degeneration of their own tissue, because we say autoimmunity can be provoked by your own tissue, right? So
we say that is a misnomer that's 30 years old.
Yeah.
What happens is things like the oxalate crystals cause the body to have to form granulomas and other things. And sometimes the granulomas don't know how to turn off, and you get a granuloma style disease. But what happens is you're turning on the T cells and training the trainable cells to start attacking this area where the crystal is. And eventually the T cells start learning to attack those tissues. But it wasn't the tissues that they're really after. They just, in this constant message all the time, go deal with this problem, starts to train them to go after this tissue. But the inciting stimulus is the particle that's forming. It starts as a nanoparticle. The nanoparticle is the most reactive to cell membranes, is the most destructive to cell membrane structure, and starts causing cells to die, and calls in the immune system, because it flips the molecules on the inner leaflet side of the membrane flip to the outside, and that tells the immune system, come take away the cell. The cell is damaged. We got to take it out.
Cell danger response.
And so it keeps calling in the response from all these different angles. So essentially what happens with a high oxalate diet is you start setting up an asbestosis type scenario in any tissue where you've got this nucleating substances, the cell debris. Now, any tissue you use every day has cells dying every day.
Yeah.
So cell debris is around. It takes
totally
a little minute for the immune system to clear the garbage out, right? There's a whole process there of digesting down old cell debris. But during that interim, before the cleanup crew comes, you've got oxalate nucleating and starting to form nanocrystals in these tissues. And that is chronically turning on the immune system. Now, in some tissues, this is naturally going to occur and you can't avoid it. And that would be the kidneys and the bladder. This is the place in the body where oxalate, concentrates. The oxalate's in the bloodstream. It's mostly the kidney's job to take it out of the blood. So the kidney's job is to concentrate toxins and flush them out of the body. Well, oxalate is a major toxin, especially depending on your diet. It's a major, major toxin that's concentrating in the kidney tubules and then concentrating in the urine in the bladder. And that's it, depending on the chemistry of your urine. If it's low in citrates, if it's too acidic, this and that, you're going to have more and more crystals forming, and you get this crystallization. So you've got these little crystals irritating the lining of the bladder.
You hear that, everyone?
Got this irritating stuff sitting in your bladder, and the body's like, oh, we got to get rid of that. And then you start getting this jumpy bladder. It's like wants to pee all the time. Like, oh, this is bad. We got to pee.
Exactly.
Out of here.
And then it does cause eventually urethral pain that was me, because it has to pass through the urethra as well. And it actually ended up damaging my urethra to the point where I had scar tissue there.
Absolutely.
It went on for a decade. I mean, it's absolutely you're going to damage and have scar tissue.
Peeing out nanoglass all the time.
All day.
This is really not good. And so you basically end up with a rash in your bladder. And some people, this is again a genetic thing. I managed to get by without ever having IC. Don't remember urethral pain ever, but I've been peeing out cloudy urine, which is evidence of crystals. When you have crystalline urine, it looks cloudy. And I've been given cloudy urine samples to the doctor forever because I've been on a high oxalate diet my whole life. And I was lucky enough to not get this. But amongst my clients and so on, that clearly have oxalate related bladder problems, what I think is going on is they basically develop a rash and a tendency to always have a rash-like reaction. You're turning on the mast cells, you're turning on the immune system with these nanocrystals, and you've trained up the bladder immune system in the bladder to just be constantly on it with this oxalate stuff. And here's the problem. You stop your smoothies and your chia seeds and your buckwheat everything and your keto chocolate everything, and you've got a thyroid gland full of oxalates, you got your saliva glands, you got your bone marrow, you got your bones, you got your tendons, you got years of oxalate in your body. And what does your body think it needs to do about that?
Get rid of it.
Get it out. And where is it going to go when you get it out? To the kidney, to the bladder. So some people miraculously get quick relief. I don't know how this happens. Like,
I don't either.
Why do they
I got worse. I actually didn't follow the advice because once I found out this was going on, I was like, I'm getting this out. I'm not going to do the slow approach. Just not doing it. So I just cut it all out, and I had like a honeymoon period for a week. And then
it takes about 5 days.
Yep, about a week. And then the dumping started, and I started having bleeding. It was so bad. I was bleeding out of the urethra because it was scratching it. You know what I mean? Yes. So I was bleeding, and it was scary. I actually had to do some ozone therapy to kind of heal that tissue. I had to intraurethral ozone for a while just because it just continued to bleed. It did eventually get better, but I'm glad you're saying this because I actually had a few of people who came and did the low oxalate diet, and they did get worse after about a week, and they're continuously going through that process. How long does dumping generally take? Is it variable for most people?
It's really variable, and some people do very well despite the dumping. It doesn't cause them nearly as much bladder problems. They start to be able to get by. Instead of getting up 5 times a night, they only get up once. It's not a complete cure in the short run by any means. My first IC person though was a woman who came to one of my free talks back in 2014. And she was so mad that I was saying figs were toxic. She was online selling Norton says figs are toxic. She was like very identified with her vegan lifestyle. That was who she was. Her bladder took her on a journey of reconsidering who she was. And she eventually listened. Now that she knew to think about what happens after I have tea, what happens after mom's figs are ripe on the tree, what happens after I eat blackberries, that's when her irritable bladder got worse. So she was able to put together, now that she heard which foods and could think about it. It's like, oh my God. And she was just about to go back to school to become a vegetarian holistic healer and stuff. And she reconsidered her whole life. So I consider that very brave. That's why you don't hear about it though, because we're so invested in our ideas. We want a workaround. We don't want a straight fact. But she miraculously, as long as she doesn't eat sweet potato or anything, she's fine, as far as I know. We're not in touch.
Crazy dumps that we all
I don't know. I need to call her and have her re-interview her and see how she's doing, because 2014 was a long time ago, and up until 2017 is the last time I probably talked to her. 18, she was fine. It just took a bite of high oxalate foods and she was fine. So that is something we need more research in. How does her bladder now know the difference? Now, and I think I know the answer. The body is super smart. The body is intelligent everywhere. All intelligence of the body is known by the body as a whole. Every cell gets to know, especially if your connective tissue is healthy. And she, she didn't eat junk food. And I think that people who never lived on the middle of the grocery store and go to fast food restaurants and that kind of, we do really well with this diet, better than people who've had both the junk food and the high oxalate foods, which sometimes are the same thing.
Yeah.
Those people don't have the same electromagnetic intelligence anymore because the fats in their membranes are so wrong.
That's
And
a
their
great
connective
explanation.
tissues are so messed up that the whole intelligence of the body is broken. And so they suffer more. So I think that's the difference, but really cool research would help us kind of sense.
That's really good information because it makes it crystal clear why when people say, well, how come so-and-so online did this diet and they got better, but here I am 3 months, 4 months, 5, 6 months later on a low oxalate diet and I'm feeling like this. And there's such variability. You just mentioned one variability is how you were before and how intelligent is your body from, and then I think there's other elements that are even not even nutritional, like how much trauma have you had in your life?
No question about it.
What's your mental state? How do you handle stress?
Right.
How old are you? Are you
Yep.
female? Are you male?
Yep.
Like age is
how much EMFs are around your environment.
Yes, EMFs.
So many, this infinite, and what's your microbiome and what's your genetic, like there's a literally infinite, like,
were you breastfed? I wasn't.
So many variables. But let me tell you, people who have really bad itching on the skin, many of them stay in this horrible itchy state for at least 6 months.
6 months.
So I would expect a minimum of 6 months before we know how soon you're going to get better with your bladder problems. And the dumping process or the cleaning of the tissue process goes on for the rest of your life. You have a permanent toxicity condition you're never 100% over. Yeah. It's not like do this for 6 months and you're done. No.
Go back to it. Yeah.
This is it. You've permanently damaged your body with microcrystals and nanocrystals of oxalate all over your bone marrow and everywhere else. It's not a quick fix. It takes at least a dozen years for you to get to really fully healthy, but it's going to be really forever that you've imprinted your body with all this oxalate damage. And some of that damage is sort of permanent. So if you get better within 6 months, consider that a miracle. And the fact that some people get better in a few weeks is like stunning.
I'm stunned. I do have people like that. I'm on year 3, everybody. And everybody always asks me, are you in remission? I am probably about 85, 90%, some days more, but I'm still dumping.
Yeah, I am too.
Out of nowhere,
I'm like, clearing oxalate. I got them loaded in my spine. I know my vertebral bones are loaded with crystals still. I'm in year 9. So I'll finish year 9 in November.
How do you know they're in your spine? I'm just curious because I just had an x-ray done recently and they found degeneration in my lower spine as well.
Yeah. So the best evidence is in your DEXA scan. And my DEXA scan showed really serious osteopenia in the hip and high bone density in the low back. So the low back has high bone density because those crystals that are all there in the vertebral bodies and the discs and the tendons and the ligaments are harder than glass. They're hard. And so they're more dense than bone. So when you get this uneven pattern in your DEXA scan, where it's high is where the crystals are, and where it's low is more typical of the rest of your spine that may or may not have crystals in it. So you often will see that mixed density pattern. In mine, clearly, I've got Schmerl's nodes, which are pits and holes in my spinal bones all through the lumbar spine. I have arthritic facet joints. I have flattened and bulging discs. I have everything you could think of wrong with the spine that's going on there. And that I think is working on it.
Or is your back pain?
Yeah, I have had chronic back pain since I was 12.
Yeah,
and I still have back pain every day. I wake up with the worst time is getting up in the morning because lying down makes it worse. I've tried all kinds of positions and stuff, and it's more like it's a gauge of my inflammation generally. When my overall inflammation is high, my back pain is worse. When the inflammation takes a break, when I'm not clearing oxalates and not allergic to all the trees, like the springtime is always bad for my back because I'm so allergic to trees. A lot of us with oxalate problems have severe allergies. We're reactive to foods like crazy. We're intolerant to all kinds of things. And we usually have multiple things going on with our health. Eyes is a place where you will also see the dumping. So you might see cloudy urine. You might see crusty, crystally eyes in the morning. Sometimes the eye grit sort of glues your eyelids together. You get extra tartar on the teeth or mucus coming out of the whatever. Some people get skin rashes or boils or weird stuff. You don't even know what to call it. So the dumping process alone is very idiosyncratic. And there's tendency for some people that like me, I'm really good at producing that cloudy urine and just working those kidneys and that poor bladder. They're fine. They're doing great, but they're doing all the work. Some people see crystally stools and get burning rectum and gritty stools. That's oxalate coming out that way.
Could it cause an anal abscess and fissure?
Yeah.
Okay.
And hemorrhoids and even maybe anal cancer. Who knows?
Oh, wow. Well, okay. Wow. You guys hear all that? So that there's a lot of things going on in there. And we just talked about a whole lot of different things. But just to tie it up, it causes a lot of health problems. It can lead to autoimmunity. It can age you. There's some genetics behind it, but generally it's really coming from your lifestyle. Your gut is tied to it. But the last piece of this, and I know people want to know is, and this is the number one thing people always say to me, I feel like this diet is too restrictive. I don't know what to eat. This diet sucks. You hear it all. And I know you've got a wonderful recipe book. I have your recipe book. You've got tons of resources. So let's finish this interview with, let's talk about how a low oxalate diet, because I follow it. It is not restrictive. Believe me, I have a lot of colors in my diet still. I just make sure to follow the low oxalate stuff. You shouldn't be avoiding meat. Meat is very important. So just eat the good stuff. And then the recipes and where they can find recipes.
Yeah. So, I've actually, most of my clients say this is the easiest diet I've ever followed. It's much easier than gluten-free or dairy-free or whatever, because as long as your system is still, the sooner you go off eating a toxic oxalate, the more you'll preserve your ability to keep eating milk and keep eating what you want. If you put this off, the chance of you developing a sensitivity to gluten and getting a more restrictive diet is really higher. And it is possible that the years of dumping have kept me sensitive to things because I'm still irritating my body and my gut and my liver with this oxalate clearing, because you will have high oxalate in your blood for years and the clearing. So we can't guarantee anything to anybody, but man, there's lots of vegetables you can eat. You can have your rice, you can have your dairy products, as long as it's not particularly bad for you. You do have to find what you can eat and customize it. But I guess restrictive is a personal thing. And if you'd rather be restricted and how you have to know where the bathroom is all the time versus carry a little food with you now and then to get through an event, or eat before you go to a wedding or something, so you don't settle for whatever else everyone else is eating.
Yes, that's my life.
Yeah. I mean, go out on the balcony and talk to somebody.
Sally. It's liberating. I have to tell people this. I go, I know you think when you're at a party and you can't have certain foods that you feel like you're missing out, but maybe you should look at it as what a gift you have to know that you're not, putting toxins in your body and everybody else is. You have a gift to know this. You're treating your body well. And ultimately what's going to happen is, as they're aging, you're not going to age as quickly as them. And you're going to look younger than them. You're going to have more energy. You're going to feel better. You're going to see all that over time. Maybe when you're in your 20s, not so much, because they're all still drinking alcohol, pounding down chips. It's hard when you're young. But when you get older, what I started happening is people are shifting, in our 40s, and they're asking questions like, so what do you do to look so young? And tell me your secrets and, all those kind of things. And it's, I'm telling you, this is the diet.
It's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle. You can look at, and the thing is, if you've already had that food that they're serving at the party, you know what it tastes like.
That's so true.
It's like,
and it's only 5 minutes of pleasure and hours and years of pain.
To me, there's no trade-off, but I'm that kind of geek who likes to be healthy and free to just be jump in a tree and enjoy myself, rather than be like heading for the pain department at the drugstore.
Yeah, waiting in line in the doctor's office for your next script.
Yeah. So, I'd say just be patient with yourself. Just find the foods that are on the high oxalate list. I've got this nice beginner's guide that keeps it really simple. So just find that list of the high foods and just think, you know what, could I live without Swiss chard? I bet you could. You can even live without sweet potatoes.
It's not that great. Come on now.
Really, spinach? You're having a meltdown because you can't eat spinach? You got to be kidding. You need a life.
I don't think it's the spinach. I think it's the chocolates and the nut butters and the nuts. And you just said it, Reese's peanut butter cup. I mean, it's heavenly. You have to admit the combination of the flavor it is, but it's something that you're going to have to give up and sacrifice. But what's the upside of that? What is the upside of that? You know, is it worth, I always say, is it worth 5 minutes of pleasure in your mouth for being laid up in the bed with pain? I don't think it is.
Well, you know, I don't really feel I have to convince anybody of that. I mean, there are foods that I find in my clients they're addicted to. It's either tea, potatoes, chocolate, or nuts. Usually peanuts. But these nut butters, people get really addicted to nut butters or Nutella or these, you know, nasty combination stuff. But you know what? Really try this plan on 6 months. If you only make this 6 weeks, and then go ahead and pig out on chocolate and see how you feel. You'll start to learn from personal experience, and it won't be, we don't have to tell you this. Mm-hmm. Your body's going to help you. If you just really give it a chance for the sake of your bladder, for the sake of your future, do the experiment of gradually working out these high oxalate foods out of your diet. See if you can get a period of several weeks without them. Then go ahead and have a lot of chocolate and peanut butter and see how you feel, and your body will help you. So it's not about us to convince anyone. You just have to be willing to check out, do your own science experiment, be your own lab rat, pay attention, learn about this, and you will, I promise you, you'll be glad you did.
Yep, that is great advice. Well, thank you so much. Where can people find you?
Okay, on my website, SallyKNorton.com, SALYKNorton.com, and go into the support tab.
Yep.
Great. The support tab has the shop page that has free downloads. It has the cookbook with 180 something recipes. You can find the beginner's guide. You can find the free thing about, you know, what's the roadmap on what is this oxalate stuff about? I forget, the oxalate basics. You know, there's a lot of resources in there. So dig around in there, reach out to us. You can join one of my group meetings and meet other people who are learning the diet and benefiting from it or trying to figure out if they should do it. So, you know, we're developing more networks with people who come to my meetings, call each other and support each other. So if you're feeling isolated, I think the problem with this diet is nobody knows what it is. And you are the only person on your block and in your family and at that wedding who's heard the word oxalate.
Yeah,
so you feel really like an oddball.
Yeah.
You're not an oddball. You're a pioneering futurist. It's a lonely place to be. It's okay.
You're on Instagram as well.
I'm on Instagram. SK Norton was my original account. I got it back from the hackers. We had a little problem in March. I lost the account. And I also have now, because of that, I have a book page called Toxic Superfoods, Oxalate book.
Okay, so your other one's back.
They're both, I have them both now.
Okay,
yep.
Okay, I'll go back and follow that
so
one.
I'm leaving, like doing my meals on my page, the SK Norton page, and I'll start putting low oxalate meals, you know, where they have a lot more veggie heavy, because my diet has gradually looks really carnivore. It looks like mostly meat. And so people want to know what I eat, but I'm not recommending my diet, but I'm sharing it because I get all this pressure and adulation. Oh, that gives me ideas. Keep posting it. So they've trained me up to post my plates of meat, but really you don't have to eat the way I do to benefit. You can stay vegan or vegetarian or whatever. Just start where you are and honor your journey and take your time. So I'll have more options for like plates of lettuce and all of that stuff on the other page.
Thank you, Sally. That helps a lot. That is really helpful. Well, this has been a pleasure, and I'm hoping people listening are going to, you know, really get some really good insight out of this interview. And you know where to find her. And you know, be patient with yourself, and just know that there's solutions out there for you.
There sure are. Thanks for your interest in this topic. It's really exciting to work together, and you know, boy, calm down your bladders, you guys.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. There's solutions. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, that's all I have for you today. I truly hope you enjoyed this interview. Be sure to like this video and drop a message in the comments below if you have any questions related to oxalates, IC, or anything related to health. Be sure to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any other upcoming interviews that I have in the future. You can find a link below for some of Sally's wonderful free resources, and you can find a link for our root cause investigation, or simply if you want to book a one-to-one call with me, the link is provided below. Thank you for attending, and we'll see you at the next one.